Welcome to another edition of Flex Rental Solutions How-To Webinars. Today we will be discussing the subrental process built into Flex Rental Solutions. So to start this off, we have created in our QA environment a couple of items here. We have a subrented serialized item and a subrented non-serialized item so that we can review how this subrental process works for serialized items and non-serialized items. So just a quick review. On non-serialized items, there is no serial number tab, and you can just change the quantity to say, I've got four out of 4 of these at the shop. And when we scan these items out, we just scan a generic quantity out and a generic quantity in. For a serialized item, there is unique serial numbers or barcodes for each individual asset that belongs to that item. And on the pull sheet, if it says we need 4 of these, then when we scan them out, we scan the 4 unique numbers that are going out and then scan the 4 unique numbers that return. So that's the difference between a non-serialized and serialized item. Now the receive process of subrentals and the return of those subrented items uses that same the same technology, meaning that if it is a non-serialized item that you're receiving, you're going to receive a generic amount of those and return a generic amount of those. If it's a serialized item that you're receiving, then it'll ask for unique barcodes that you're going to receive, or it can generate those unique barcodes for you. So if you want to track each one of those items that you're receiving, if you have an item that you don't own at all and you are receiving these from another vendor, if you would like to track each of their barcodes in the system, then I would set that item to be serialized. If you just want to receive generic quantities, then go ahead and just leave that as non-serialized. So we're going to get started doing a new quote. We're going to just call this test subrental. And we're going to say we need this on Friday, and it's going to come back on Friday. And we're just going to get to work. We're not worried about any other information right now. So when we put in this item and say we need 4 of these, it says we're short 4. When we put in this serialized item and say we need 4 of those, again, we're short 4 of these. When we click on this notifier here, the -4, we call this the meatball or the notifier. If you double click there, this will give you all your options on how you can resolve this insufficient quantity. Right now under subrent, there are no vendors displayed here. You can get to that exact same page by clicking on the cogwheel, left click, and go to conflicts, and that brings you there. So both of those areas got you to the same place. I can also go to the cogwheel and go to open inventory item. Here's the item. If we go to suppliers here, we have a purchase supplier preference and a subrental supplier preference. If I go and look for a vendor, and let's say PRG as an example, and let's say we get that from them for $100 and hit update. What that will do is if we go back to this test subrental and we click on the serialized item to resolve the conflict. Oops. Oh, I probably did not. Let's see. Oh, I did that on the non-serialized item. I apologize. Okay. What you'll see is now there's some new information in there that one of the possibilities of subrenting to resolve this conflict is through PRG, and we normally rent this for $100 each. So that's one way that we can resolve that conflict. Now, if we don't have the vendor in here that we want to use, you could also just double click right here on Subrent. We could find the new contact, maybe VER, and there's VER. Or we could add a new contact in the system, a vendor, and that would add the vendor information into the system, and it'll do some other fun stuff. If I double click on VER, or I could single click on VER and hit accept. Either of those will work. I'm just going to double click on there. Now what this did is it did a couple different things. First of all, let's go back to this subrented non-serialized item. And you'll notice that there is a new vendor possibility. We pre-configured PRG, and during that subrental process, when we selected VER, it also added that vendor directly to this item. So we taught the system that this is another vendor that we get this item from. We have not put in the estimated cost as of yet, but we could say we get this from VER for, say, $95 and hit update. So now the next time we try to resolve that conflict, it'll list both PRG and VER as possible subrental vendors and their appropriate price. So you'll also notice that by selecting VER, it updated our quantity to say we have a plan in place to have enough of these available in time for this job to go out. Third thing it did was it created a rental PO as a child element for us. And that's got this subrented non-serialized item for VER as a child element, and put in the need by date and the return by date that we can modify if we'd like. We could say I want to get this a day ahead of time, and I'm going to be by to pick that up at, say, noon. And then we'll have it back later on that day, maybe by 5 p.m. as an example. Other things that it did with that process is if we go to the logistics view, we have logistically what is happening to all these items. And you'll notice here that it is filled in that we have a plan to subrent 4 of these from VER. Other things that we can do from this logistical page is the ability to use the bulk edit functionality to create subrentals. If I selected both of these items and hit bulk edit, the type references, this is a rental item, so we're going to leave that. The quantity is how many we need. The subrental quantity, we could either click in here and put in a number of how many we're going to subrent, but sometimes you may have 4 of one item, 2 of another, 3 of another item, and you don't want to have to hand enter the sub quantity here. So we've added some functionality to the drop down to say, we'll just fill in the subrental quantity for how many are short. So maybe we were renting 4 and we're only short 2. That would fill in 2 subrentals instead of 4. Or you could say, take the quantity field, the total quantity, which is right here, and fill that in to my subrental quantity. So if we had both of these selected and both of them were 4 out of 4, that would just fill in both 4s right there. And then under vendor, we could click in here and say, and we're getting both of these from VER. Now what we've done here is we have just updated this information here. We have not put any automation profile into play. So if we want to push these hand modified updates, you would go to the logistical information area over in the menu area and hit update subrental paperwork. And we could just hit generate update rental PO. or you could use specific rental POs and push them to an existing PO. We'll just hit generate PO, and so it is now updated this specific PO. So that's our logistical information. And if we go to our rental PO, now it is added both of those items. And if we refresh availability, we now should have enough of all these items to take care of this job needs. So that's the first process in the way we can push information to rental POs. The first was single clicking on a single item and using the automation profile to generate rental POs. The second was going to logistical information, updating the logistical information columns here, the subrent quantity and the subrent vendor. And then through the logistical tab here, hitting update subrental paperwork. So with this in place, we now have a quote and a rental PO. To receive these items, you would go into warehouse and receiving. That's where we go through and receive everything. And here's our test subrental. So we can double click there. And there are the two items that we are subrenting. The non-serialized item and the serialized item. If we double click on subrent non-serialized item, we can just say how many are we receiving, and we could put in we're getting 4 of these items and add them to our inventory. If we go back to the subrented non-serialized item and go to quantity, we now in this warehouse that we've been working out of Flex, Utah, have 4 on the shelf out of 4 in subrental stock. So that went from 0 out of 0 to 4 out of 4. And on our subrented serialized items, you'll see that we have 0 out of 0. So let's go to receiving, and we'll double click on the serialized item. We can have the system auto assign a barcode. We can type in a stencil. If they're, say we're running a moving light and they've got a stencil on it, we could fill in that information. We could put in their serial number. And let's add just one with an assigned barcode. So we've added 1. And let's go back and just review what happened. So now we've got 1 out of 1 of these in subrental stock. And under serialized items, that's got a sub in front of it with our unique number that we've created. So that's one way that we can receive those items. If we double click on this again, or we can also click in here, scan the barcode from their existing, if their moving light has a barcode and we want to track it, we could click in there, scan that barcode, and hit add to inventory also. So I'm going to put VER 12345 as an example and add that to our inventory. And so if we review that, oops, we received an extra one. I'll have to check on that item. Must have hit that twice. So now we've successfully received everything, and we'll hit finalize. And so that'll receive that. So now we've got all 4 of these, and because I hit that twice, I'm just going to change this so when we scan it out, it'll be easier to go. So what happens now is we've got a quote, a subrental PO, and we've received very specific subrented items. For the quote, we're going to confirm the quote and get ready to send it out. And we'll generate our pull sheet. And from here, we're going to go to start to prep these items. So we'll go to our prep screen. What you'll notice here is there is a column called Subrent. This is highlighted and has a number in it. This is the quantity that we're subrenting. So 4 out of 4 are going out. And of those 4 that are going out, all 4 are subrented. And if you hover over the number, it'll show you the vendor that we have scheduled to send these out from VER. So on the non-serialized items, when we send those out, it's saying, are these going out of rental stock or subrental stock? We're going to click subrental stock and hit accept. On these items, because they're serialized, it's going to give us a list of which ones are we sending out. Again, here, it's saying these 4 are from VER, and we could select we're sending this one out. And say, no, I don't need this prompt again. And we're going to virtually scan out each one of these items that belong to someone else. Make sense? So now on our manifest is basically everything that we received, we sent back out. Let's review our inventory items. All 4 of these are out on test subrental. This is when they're due back. And under our quantity, we now have 0 out of 4 in subrental stock. So the second number is how many of these we currently have ownership of. So we currently have ownership of 4 subrented items. The first number on hand is how many are on the shelf. So of those 4 subrentals, none are in the warehouse right now. They're out on shows. And if we go to our subrental non-serialized item, the exact same thing. We've taken ownership of 4 of them, but sent them out, so that's why we have 0 out of 4. None are on the shelf, of which 4 we have ownership of. So from here, when the job comes back, we're going to skip to the return manifest. And there's our test subrental. And we can start to receive these back. Because these are non-serialized, we can just manually check them back in. On the subrented, again, it's saying, hey, we want to make sure that these are going back into subrental stock. So we'll click that and hit accept and return all those. So now as far as our job is concerned, we received everything back from our end client or from our show that went out, even though it was all someone else's gear. And let's review our inventory. Now our on hand is we've got 4 of these back in our rental stock out of 4 that we should have. And we'll check our subrented serialized item and exact same thing. So that was the same thing for serialized and non-serialized. Under the warehouse subrental returns, this is where we can get these 8 items completely off our books again. So if we go to test subrental, I can click on that and process and say we're going to send all 4 of these back. And then each one of these serialized items, we can process the return for that. And get these all off of our books. So that's 100% return. And if we go back to our subrented serialized item, we now don't have possession of any subrental items. We have taken these and returned them. So both our on hand is 0 and our allocated is 0. And if we go back to our subrented non-serialized item, the exact same thing. We no longer have these items in our subrental ownership or on hand. So that's a overview of the process of generating a rental PO, receiving the rental PO, shipping that gear out, receiving that same gear back in, and then returning it back to the owners.